Okay, moving on. Married senior comic slash Kirby. They should have called him Saggy by the look of his arms and his boobs there. I was going with a pun for the witness humour he had expressed, and feeling the upset from what had happened that time. Likely he was married, but I wasn't sure, so I went with something like ye old merry men, and smushed the merry term, also implying he had used to be more merry and positive. Senior, since he was that old, and comic for his comical delivery and word choice in each interaction. Chris's long awaited explanation for that name, that nobody asked for. You're missing your arms and legs. You work in a McDonald's and you have the most embarrassing, incomprehensible name in the world. Obviously, this answer is to go to the supervillainy. You're not wrong. Married Senior Comic is a McDonald's manager, real name Kirby McDerby. He is quite possibly the most unfortunately named villain in all of Solitude, as readers couldn't figure out what the meaning of the words that Chris was trying to convey for over a decade after the comic's publication. If you want to call Solitude published, but there you go. And the name of the Manajerks' real-life counterpart offered no insight into this strangeness. Fans presumed that the name was a misspelling of Married Senior Comic. Eventually, Chris would offer an explanation, shown above, in 2020, indicating that married was a pun on married and senior was a misspelling. Although, even putting it together, it's still a baffling name choice. The Married Senior comic appeared for the first time in Solitude issue 3, helping the Bee Manager in his opposition of Chris's love quest. He is one half of the McDuo of the city of MCDville of the region of Malwart. He has cybernetic arms and legs and is armed with a broadsword for no apparent reason, except that it also allows Chris to recreate the Black Knight scene from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. In Sonichu, Married Sonic Senior comic was defeated in a sword fight by Darkbind Sonichu, which Chris defeated his partner. Whilst Chris defeated his partner. In Sonichu issue 4, which continues the two-part story, the WM manager arrives as backup, but when he fails as well as the McDuo flee the scene, when the comic not seeming to even care about the recent loss of both of his arms. Yeah, I would have been a little bit more like one of those things you should ask someone to call the doctor for. In Sonichu issue 7, the character appears at Mary Lee Walsh's villain convention, where he is even more inexplicably described as Married Senior Comic / Kirby, although the Kirby has been removed in more recent versions. Hooray, I guess. This is the last time the character is seen. But as mentioned above, he did participate in the Battle of Quickville off-screen, becoming a giant along with the Bee Manager and fighting the Cart Megazord. It is presumed that he had depowered and set free like the other Manajerks after Colossal Chan reversed Mary Lee Walsh's brainwashing. WM Manajerk. After Chris was kicked out of the Walmart's McDonald's, as was seen above, he returned 2 days later, apparently feeling that the expulsion only applied to the McDonald's and not this entire building. The man he identifies as B Manager, frustrated with Chris's unwelcome return, asked the Walmart manager to deal with him. After a terse argument, Chris fled, flipping the Walmart manager off and shouting his weeaboo magic spells at him. Clearly upset by the events of the June 20th, 22nd, 2005 incident, Chris took revenge in the only way that he could, by turning those men into fictional supervillains he could defeat in his fantasy life. In the You Know What, I Hate Me Too segment, Christian put on his ED page in March 2008. He says he got his ass handed to him by a cripple, with an image from sub-episode 5 of WM Manager beating up Chris Chan. This could imply that the real-life WM Manager might be physically disabled, perhaps explaining the reason he has a robotic body in the comics. The WM Manager character first appeared in the end of sub-episode 4, which was featured in Sonichu issue 3 and reused in Sonichu issue 4. In the comic, Chris defeats B Manajerk and married Senior Comic with the help of Darkbind Sonichu. At the end of sub-episode 4, Darkbind leaves, thinking the crisis resolved, but soon Chris is confronted by another enemy, the WM Manajerk. Unlike the B Manajerk, who ceased to be human clad in armor, the WM Manajerk appears to be merely a human head in a jar, mounted atop a massive robot body. His appearance seems to be based on Richard Nixon from the Futurama episode A Head in the Polls. This episode featured Nixon as a similarly built robot with a head in a jar. The concept of a head in a jar is hardly unique to Futurama. But it is a show beloved by Chris, and virtually nothing he draws hasn't been at least loosely based off an already existing character. Actually, has Chris ever mentioned like Futurama before? Couldn't say whether or not he has or not, but it's a fan's conception. It's a very good one. Almost kind of looks like Mr. Freeze somehow. Anyway, the story continues in sub-episode 5, where Chris and the WM Manajerk do battle. Unlike the verbal combat in his real-life encounter, the fight here is completely physical, with WM pretty much beating the crap out of Chris. As you might expect, a giant robot would. Just as Chris begins to lose hope, though, he receives a vision from the ancient leader of the Cherokean clan, who informs him that he must combine the powers of his medallion of Fail with his heart torch of Fail to summon the dream sibling of Fail. Realizing that his ancestor is referring to Crystal, whom he had previously drawn as one of his homemade Yu-Gi-Oh cards, Chris follows his advice and manages to create a physical body for his imaginary twin sister. Undaunted, WM Manajerk presses his attack, but when Chris and Crystal transform into Christian Sonichu and Crystalina Rosechew, respectively, they quickly overpower him. By combining their ultimate attacks, Chris's Kursyayameha and Crystal's shocking Tiara magic, they destroy the Manajerk's armor, leaving only his disembodied head. Crystal gives WM a long, boring talk about how important it is for Chris to get laid. And how WM is missing out on some awesomely great emotions big time. Wonderfully compelling. Even Chris gets tired of hearing the bitch ramble on, even though he does the exact same thing nearly every issue. And he stops her to ask who sent WM Manajerk in the first place. WM reveals that he, along with B Manajerk and married Senior Comic, were agents of the private villa of corrupted citizens, led by Mary Lee Walsh. Furious that Walsh has attacked him again, Chris and Crystal kick the head jar all the way back to PVCC, where it strikes Mary on the head. WM Manajerk would briefly return sans body in the pages of Sonichu issue 7, when he and his fellow Manajerks attended the Council of Villains at PVCC. Unlike B Manajerk's armor, WM Manajerk's robot body is actually pretty damn strong. It survives several attacks from both Chris and Crystal, and appeared to possess super strength, being able to effortlessly lift the very heavy Chris high above its head, and was also able to punch him with sufficient strength to send him flying backwards into a soda fountain. The jar containing his head appears to be quite durable as well, since it survived being kicked from Mallwart to PVCC, without breaking even upon collision with Mary Lee Walsh's head. It can be assumed that the head jar also acted as a kind of life support system. Only the combined power of Chris-chan, Sonichu, and Crystalina Rosechew were able to defeat WM Manajerk's body, as these are two of the more powerful characters in the series. That makes WM Manajerk a pretty major league guy. Of course, now that he's just ahead, his threat level is severely diminished. Hell, Rosechew could probably beat him up right now. Scott Palazzo. The only man on the planet to spell his first name and last name without a space, and possibly the first manager Chris encountered, Scott Palazzo was based upon the manager of the Charlottesville Fashion Square, rechristened the Far Square of Show Mao region in Sonichu issue 4. Chris' experiences in Fashion Square were documented earlier in the series when he battled the Jerkeef and got trolled hard by Hannah. But Scott Palazzo himself would not be introduced until sub-episode 6, when he expressed envy of Chris for his made-up TV show, Quick's Backyard Safari. Nobody wants to see Quick's Backyard Safari. It's literally cluttered like the rest of his house. Scott was clearly designed to resemble Lord 2 Palazzo from Excel Saga, and he is depicted as a jaded misanthrope who blamed love itself for his mother's murder-suicide. Whether or not the real Scott Palazzo suffered such a traumatic life as his comic counterpart, the fictional Scott remained one of the only villains in the series to give any kind of reason for his actions. Chris is bad at writing heroes, and he's bad at writing villains, it would seem. Wes Isley was motivated by jealousy. Mary gave reasons for her own war on love in Solitude 10. Jason Kendrick Howe's motivation was existentialism, and then there was Scott. Despite being one of the few villains to actually have motivation to do the crazy supervillain shit the PVCC gets up to, however, he never actually does anything. In his debut appearance, he hires more jerk-ups to take down Chris, but he never gets any kind of comeuppance for this, and he never fights any of the heroes. He cameos again in Solitude issue 7, at the Council of Villains, and his character description says that he banned all virgins from his region. But this is all he has ever been seen to do. In many ways, he is more like an actual manager than any of the other Manajerks on this page. His given motivation conflicts with later revelations that all PVCC members, including the Manajerks, were really just brainwashed slaves of Mary Lee Walsh. Colossal Chan's power supposedly undid all brainwashing, and Chris' statements on the subject claim that all of the Manajerks were cleared of everything. Presumably this can be taken to mean that Scott was also a victim, and that his jaded personality was reverted to whatever it was like prior to Mary's effect. Scott Palazzo, a villain who has an uncanny talent for unnaturally bending his arms around tables at 90-degree angles. Turdy Jerk. The last of the Manajerks to be introduced, Turdy Jerk first appeared in sub-episode 7 in Solitude issue 4, alongside his accomplice, Trebor Capman. The duo confronted Chris in the Getar region. The episode was based on an incident that occurred in real life at the newly opened Target store in Chris's area, attempting to start fresh in new prowling grounds. Chris planned to pay a single dollar to receive a soda at the snack bar and exploit their free refill policy, which is usually meant for paying patrons who order food as well as a drink, to keep refilling the same soda over and over and over again, while he spent the entire day sitting there doodling his shitty characters and spying on women as they shopped, keeping his seating area near the entrance/exit. This finally caught the attention of management, who eventually summoned the officer Baguette to get him out of the store. Unlike previous Manajerks, however, Chris doesn't give these two any special powers or armor, and the two aren't even named until their later cameo in Solitude issue 7. When all of the Manajerks meet with Mary Lee Walsh at PVCC in their initial appearance, the two Manajerks walk up to Chris at his table and tell him that he was loitering and had to get out, saying they had been in contact with Morwald security and knew of his behavior. In his idealized fantasy world where Chris whitewashes everything he does, the comic version of Chris is indeed loitering, and he also initially ignores the two managers trying to talk to him. Upon noticing them, he groans and says he is not loitering, and then summons a tornado with his medallion, channeling Angelica's powers, to blow them away. It should be noted at this point that these two Manajerks did not actually attack Chris or even threaten him, meaning Chris just assaulted two unarmed, normal humans for telling him to leave their store. Behold the two most harmless villains in the series. The names of the characters are puzzling. Trolls speculate that Trebor Capman might actually be an alias for someone called Robert Capman, given Chris's love for reversing names. And while the origin of Turdy Jerk's name is somewhat more ambiguous, the two most common theories are that they are some derived from a stereotype of the Indian accent, as well as the character has a vaguely South Asian appearance, and his real-life counterpart is probably the same. Or that the name Turdy Jerk is merely Chris's juvenile sense of humour and a way to insult the real-life manager by giving him a nickname that sounds like turd. I'd say that's 100% intentional. And so, ladies and gentlemen, after a very, very long time, that is the entirety of Manajerks covered. It's once again, Chris's attitude towards, law enforcement and authority seems to extend to nothing more than if they in any way pose a threat towards Chris's love quest, whether or not Chris was in the right, actually, you know what, he never was in the right. If he is encountered or, questioned or anything like that, he will throw a tantrum, do some of the most juvenile shit you would expect anyone who would love nothing more than to get arrested for, and then demonize them some more. However, as many people can work out, they don't particularly fall for Chris's, shit or shenanigans for 1 second. They do, however, believe that he did some shitty things, and there's plenty of evidence to back this up. So anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this article of Manajerks, and I will hope to see all of you guys again in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye for now. Thunderbolt and lightning, very, very frightening me.